You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
All right, we're back with Experiencing Data again, and this week I have a representative from Google on the line. We have Dai Dang. Hi, Dai.
Hey, Brian.
What's happening?
Not much. Life, you know.
You're in London, spreading some gospel about AI and user experience design. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. So I'm usually based in Seattle, but this week I am in London for the Pair Symposium. That's the People Plus AI Research Symposium, where we bring together people from across policy, government, the tech industry, social good, education, and such to discuss the field of human-centered AI and what we can do to ensure a more inclusive, accessible, ethical future that incorporates AI for all of us.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to digging in some details on this. Your title at Google is Emerging Tech Design Advocate. So what does that mean? You're a designer and you've kind of moved into like an advocacy role, or could you explain what that means to the non-Googlers?
Yes, for sure. And even Googlers themselves. There's not many of us design advocates at Google, so it's a mouthful and it's a relatively niche role. But to your point, precisely. So my background is as a UX designer, and I work now in more of an advocacy capacity. So what that means exactly is that I am focused on working with the product community, working with product teams outside of Google to understand what are their challenges and pain points when it comes to emerging technologies. Like, so for instance, what does it mean to create a usable, delightful mobile augmented reality experience, right? Or like, hey, what's this AI ML thing that people keep talking about? How can we make sure that we are designing machine learning driven features that are human-centered, where our users understand how to utilize this feature and say like what its unique capabilities and constraints are. So essentially my role as an emerging tech design advocate is to help product teams, help designers overcome challenges when it comes to working with machine learning in this case.
And is this largely within the walls of Google that you're doing this work, or?
No. So while I may be a Googler, my audience, the people that I work with, are all outside of Google. Or in terms of like the teams and organizations that I work with are outside of Google. Because it's important for us to, so I'll take a step back. At Google, the team that I work with is called Pair, People Plus AI Research. And the Pair team was founded a couple years ago for really two key purposes. The first is to ensure that applications of machine learning are grounded in user needs, that we're not just doing machine learning for the sake of doing machine learning because it's the cool, sexy, hip thing to do, right? And the second key purpose behind the Pair team is to ensure that when we're utilizing machine learning, that we're doing so in ways that are beneficial and inclusive for our end users. And so a part of that work means that even though I work with the Pair team, it's important for us to understand, what does an AI design and development process look like for teams outside of Google? Everyone ranging from, say, an NGO working in India or an NGO based in India, right, to another large enterprise that, say, is based in the UK. What are the challenges that they're running into when it comes to machine learning literacy?
Got it. So at a high level, like we talk a lot on this show about, obviously, my background's in human-centered design, and we're always talking about analytics and AI as well, and decision support, right? Because a lot of these applications are about predicting or prescribing information that hopefully comes in the form of decision support and helps you make a good choice. So from your perspective, if you could tell a data science or analytics leader one reason why design matters in the context of developing, AI products or algorithms, specifically, let's talk about machine learning. I know there's other technologies, but if there's one reason why design matters here, What would that be?
Just one reason. I only have one reason I can give.
Well, like the most important thing, it's like, who cares? So it's kind of like, so, okay, so what?
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced. I'm a leader, whatever. I have my background's in analytics or stats, math. Maybe I'm not a tech company. Why do I need to care about this? Like, sell me on why this matters.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you asked that. I'm really glad that you posed that question to me, because I'll be honest with you, even within Google, I can't tell you how many times I have tech leaders, engineers who will kind of, cock an eyebrow at me and ask, well, so why would design be involved when it comes to working with machine learning? And it's an obstacle that I have to make sure that I clear in advance. And so when it comes to, if say if you're from a deep data scientist, ML, machine learning engineering background, the key value proposition that design brings to you is we want to work with you to help make sure that when we're utilizing machine learning, that we're utilizing it to solve a problem for a user in a way that couldn't be done through other technologies, or like through heuristics or rules-based programming, right? That we're really using machine learning where it's where it's most needed. That's one big thing, to make sure there's an actual fit. Another is that we can help save time and money. We all know that working with machine learning is a very time and cost intensive process, right? Everything from collecting, labeling, cleaning the data, to building and taking the time and energy to build and train the machine learning model. And the unique value prop of design is that we can help test out the proposed machine learning solution by faking it before you ever actually go about collecting any data or building any models. And so I'll give an example. There's a user research and design method that we utilize at Google called Triptych. And what Triptych, it's a mixed methods user research and design process that allows us to test out a number of different hypothetical solutions, like hypothetical features that we're thinking of working on for users, quickly validate it with users in the form of user testing, or in the form of user research, to understand, okay, is this solving a real need? How urgent or priority of a problem is this? And then based on that, make sure that when we do start working more closely with our data scientists or our machine learning engineers, that their time and energy is being invested in a feature that's already proven out, that's already been validated to be impactful. And so how Triptych works is essentially you kind of create, well, first you start off with a lightweight survey, right? So say there's a problem. I'm going to use a mini case study from the Pixel 2 team, where they were working on the Now Playing feature that shipped on the Pixel 2 phone a couple years ago. And essentially what it does for the user is that in the lock screen state, the Pixel is able, if there is music playing ambiently in the background, the Pixel is able to tell you what song and artist that is without you actually doing anything on the lock screen itself. So that's the end. That was the end feature that ended up shipping, right? But walking back to like, how did this even come to be? How did design and research and machine learning eng and data scientists come together to make this happen? Well, the team was brainstorming potential features to work on with Pixel 2. And so one of the problem statements they landed on was, I said potentially, as a user, I want to know what song is playing without actually futzing with my phone, right? And this was like one potential problem statement of, I don't know, like other 15 or 20 other potential problem statements. So then based on that, they then sent out, they brought users together and shared out that problem statement along other ones and asked them to fill out a quick lightweight survey rating like how frequently they encounter this problem, like say, on a daily, weekly, monthly, whatever basis, as well as like how severe or urgent would you like this problem to be solved. And so that kind of quickly helps us assess like how significant of a user benefit it would be if we could deliver on this, right? And then you move into the storyboard process, where essentially the design team will quickly mock up or like kind of illustrate 3 panels. The first panel represents the problem statement. So, as a user, I want to be able to, know what songs are playing in the background. Second panel is the proposed solution. So, my Pixel can automatically tell me what song is playing based on what's in my environment. And then the third panel is the potential impact for the user. So, as a user, I can go about my day and, know what's playing and not have to mess with it, right? So 3 panels: problem statement, proposed solution, as well as potential impact. And then we take this and we show it to our users within this research setting to try to elicit some reactions. Not only again, like, what do you think about this solution and how it fit into your day-to-day life, but also what concerns do you have? What questions do you have? And so as you can probably imagine, like ones that often, top concerns that we heard were like, so is this going to drain my battery life? Does this mean that Google's always listening to me, etc.? And based on that, the team was able to work with the engineers to then create a solution, the final solution, the now playing feature, that included settings for opting in and out of this for those who are more concerned about privacy, as well as like a little tooltip on the settings panel that actually talked a little bit about how this works, that this is on-device machine learning, so none of your information is sent up to the cloud, et cetera, right? And so the reason why I talk about this is that the team didn't immediately start in on like, okay, what's the training data that we need, and like we should actually start building up models in order to have a functional prototype to test this. But we were able to test this hypothesis purely through low tech, no tech purposes, right? Purely through like a 3-panel storyboard to make sure that when we were ready to work more closely with our data scientist or machine learning engineer, that we were in a good place to deliver out a solution that would actually be meaningful for users.
Got it. Yeah. No, that's fairly traditional in terms of like the standard design processes. Although if I can take a guess and try to add to what you said, and you clarify if I'm wrong here for our listeners, I think part of what you get out of that, if you're a business leader, you're coming at this from the data science or analytics side of the fence, is that you don't always know exactly how you need to deliver the machine learning in terms of the format or the experience that needs to be had. And so part of like what this process did, it sounds like it surfaced the need to discuss or provide an affordance to learn about privacy within that experience, where there might be other times where like, autocomplete, maybe we don't talk about how autocomplete works when you're typing, even though maybe that uses machine learning, because through the process of doing this prototyping and getting validation, maybe you find out that users never brought it up. It doesn't matter. We don't need to spend time explaining how that works. And while that's perhaps a trivial, minor piece of content there, it's the moving from the not knowing to the knowing that's actually something that needs to be factored into a successful solution, which itself may have impacts on the technology choices that are used. We talk about model trust a lot of the shows. So how much interpretability needs to be given to the customer in that particular context to trust the solution and decide that they're going to engage with it. Is that also what you did I properly summarize that, or did I just make that up? That was my perception.
No, that was beautifully articulated. So beautifully articulated. I wish I had said those exact things myself. No, that was brilliant. And
the show is not sponsored by Google, by the way.
Swear to God. And as I was listening to you reflect that back to me, a key piece that I hear again from internal Google product teams as well as external product teams that I work with is that it's very, very easy to start. It's very, very easy for a lot of teams to default to a tech first kind of mentality. It's like, oh, well, machine learning is, like, should we ML this? Right? That's a very common problem that we hear. And then machine learning becomes this hammer for which everything is a nail.
It's a verb.
But if only a hammer, weren't as easy to construct as like a piece of wood and like a little metal anvil kind of bit, right? Like say if it took months to actually make that hammer instead, weeks and months to create that hammer instead. And so that's why when we talk about like the value proposition of incorporating design into the machine learning process, it's starting first with the question of what are the user problems that we want to solve? What are the user needs that we are seeing? And then the secondary question is how, of all the technological tools in our toolkit, machine learning being one of them, how is machine learning uniquely positioned to solve this problem in a way that couldn't be solved through any other means? Mm-hmm. And then that's the foundation that we start from.
So it sounds like you're saying that you're hearing a tendency to want to use this tool where like we're hunting for places to whack our machine learning hammer. Are you seeing this at Google as well. And I think, that we talk about this kind of FOMO, I think that's there. And I think there's a valid promise that there's a real opportunity with AI. It's going to change businesses in a significant way. And there's something to that. At the same time, it's like go purchase some data scientists, throw them in your team, and have them start whacking stuff. And they're kind of like waiting for someone to hand them a good problem to work on, and the business doesn't know. They're just saying, "What is our machine learning strategy?" And so they're hunting for someone in theory, hopefully, is hunting for a good problem to solve, right? So, how does your design group like fit into that? What I call the problem discovery phase, and are you interacting with your machine learning and your data science counterparts during this, such that they're hopefully getting some of this rubbed off on them, and they're able to change their thinking and their approach so it scales? Because there's only so many of pair advocates, right, as you would call them at Google. How are they involved in that? Like, that was kind of a long rambling question, but I'm curious. Like, are you guys all doing this together, and is there this kind of problem hunt phase that involves the technical people, such that they can kind of frame their work with that perspective?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Like our key involvement in this is, so as I had mentioned, or actually I don't know if I actually mentioned yet. So in my work with the Pair team, right? Like, we launched the People Plus AI Guidebook earlier this year at Google I/O, and it's essentially an open source framework for helping product creators understand what's unique about what's unique about making machine learning product decisions that's different from traditional, say, traditional non-machine learning product design. And so one of the key things that we talk about at Pair is, like, we kind of share out a set of exercises that you can do with your cross-functional team to come to that consensus. And so something that we really advocate for and implement anytime that, like, say, we're facilitating design sprints inside as well as outside of Google, is starting off with a simple 2x2 exercise, right? So you have a 2x2, so 4 quadrants, and the left axis, it's not the left axis, the y axis is, say, user impact or user benefit. And then the x-axis is how critical or dependent is machine learning in this, for this solution. And then when we kick off a design sprint, or when we kick off brainstorming, ideation, essentially, around the next set of features that we want to work on, we bring together the entire cross-functional team. So not just your product manager, your data scientist, your machine learning engineer, your tech lead, your UX designer, UX writer, user researcher, bringing together all the key disciplines. And then we'll have time to essentially brainstorm, right, on individual Post-it notes. Like, what are potential solutions or features that we think could solve a need? And so everyone documents that. And then after that kind of individual ideation session, starts mapping it out on this 2x2, right? And so because you have the entire team coming together, the user researchers and the user researchers and the UX designers have a keen sense of what the user's current journey is, and so where these different solutions could fit in, as well as, like, what their top pain points are, and so what is really impactful of a problem to solve for users, right? And then on the other hand, you have the data scientists, you have your tech lead, your machine learning engineers in the room, and they're able to help vet and validate how critical is machine learning to solving this problem, or can it be done through another means? And when you have everyone in the room like that, ideating, having conversations about the trade-offs, ideally you want to move forward, you want to converge on everything that's in the upper right hand quadrant. Essentially, the ideas, the features that could be most impactful, most beneficial for your users, as well as the ones that are actually dependent, that really critically need machine learning in order for that solution to get off the ground, right? And it's through that kind of foundational phase that you get that buy-in from data science, from the tech side of the house as well, to move forward.
Thanks for breaking that down. The next question I'm having, so I'm taking this perspective in my head that, a lot of my work has come through tech companies. That's kind of the ranks that I came up through.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, and so a lot of the verbiage we're talking about here, user research, product management, some of these roles don't exist in places, or at least when we say product management, we're probably thinking about a digital software product or application, like a commercial, something like that. So what if we're talking about, like, small motors for, like, I make the motors that go in lawnmowers. Okay, so when we talk about product management at our company, I have like the guy that works on, the lawnmower size motors, and then we go all the way up to like large industrial scale motors. And so that's my quote product. And maybe there's some application of machine learning here, which perhaps doesn't have a heavy user facing component to it, but I'm interested in this concept of like making machine learning work for my business. I don't want to just throw the technology at the wall. I'm at least aware that we should be using machine learning in the service of some customer experience or problem. So who should I send? My question is, who should I send? Like, if I was to send one person off and go look at this stuff that Di talked about on this podcast, and they have some guide or something, who would I send from my business to go do that? Who's the next best role if we don't have a UX lead? We don't even have UX. Like, it just doesn't exist. Like, what would it be? That frontline business sponsor? Should it be the data scientist? Like, who would you suggest takes that first step?
I'd say it's the person who has the most combination of authority as well as investment in the end user facing considerations, right? And so across, I'm thinking now of like the teams that I work with outside of Google. That's ranged from roles like research scientists who have that keen interest in like how does this actually impact people at the end of the day, to product leads, product managers, essentially like kind of like the mini CEO, so to speak, of like this lawnmower type of product that this example that you gave, to even some like I've even had like other data scientists reach out to me in the past who didn't have a background in user experience design or research, but who were keenly interested in applying human-centered AI design processes. So the thing about the guys, I know, and I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I do try to be cognizant of like this context that I came up in around within the tech industry. Even if you don't have a trained background or even if your role doesn't have user experience designer or user research in it, it doesn't, the People Plus AI guidebook is meant to help break down those silos and those barriers across these different titles and roles, right? So it's written in a very plain spoken way so that data scientists, engineers, tech leads can pick it up with a sense of like, what are some actionable pointers in terms of like, the kind of questions that I might want to ask my user to make sure that we're solving the right problem for them, or what are some things that I can think about when it comes to confidence intervals and what it means for my users, right? It's because and this is kind of a larger discussion within the design field. Regardless, we're all making design decisions, and some of us may have more training or experience in making those design decisions than others, but it definitely doesn't mean that there isn't an abundance of tools and resources out there to help us make as well qualified design decisions as possible.
Sure, and I'm glad you said that. And just to clarify what she's talking about, I don't think we've said it, but there's Google has produced largely with your leadership, from what I understand, the People Plus AI guidebook, and it's pair.withgoogle.com, and I'll put the link into the show notes here. So you're referring to that, and one thing I really did like about the guide when I went through it, and it's something I talk about on the show as well, is it's not so much about job roles as it is about encouraging certain behaviors and activities. You figure out who goes and does them, yes, but it's really centered around the activities that need to happen in order to get these types of kind of human-centered outcomes, if that's your goal. So I really did like that, and it's not technical. It's something that any frontline business manager could understand, and to me, it's kind of a question of whether or not you want to move fast, whether you bring a designer in who's done this and who's familiar with all this kind of stuff to move fast and be efficient, versus kind of learning this process on the job and learning how to keep your technology cravings at check, or speed, right? Everyone's trying to move fast all the time and ship code. And a lot of times we focus on the shipping of code and the putting of productions models into production as our measurement, as opposed to the outcomes that come from putting something into production. So I think it's a nice check on how are we going to evaluate these success criteria? What do we need to be thinking about that may not be obvious, that has nothing to do with code or model training or any of that? Well, it does have to do with model training a bit, because you guys actually, this is going to dovetail into my next question in a second, but I think you guys did a good job putting that together in a way that's kind of role independent.
Yeah, and seizing on that, I really like the way that you set up the benefits and the goals of the People Plus AI Guidebook. Right, it's really encouraging to hear, because that was one of our goals with this resource to begin with, is to make practicing human-centered AI design as accessible as possible for anyone who's incorporating machine learning into their service, into their product, into their feature, what have you, right? And I'll also take a moment here to further unpack what I mean when I say human-centered AI, because I know that can also sound very buzzy, or like, kind of like ideological in a way. It's like, oh, I'm not sure what's the substance there. And so when I say human-centered AI, what I mean is that, with all the hype and craze around AI ML as of late, it dovetailed with kind of larger misconceptions or misunderstanding around what do we mean when we say AI machine learning? How can it help us? What can it do for us? Right? There's a lot of misunderstanding and even concern out there amongst the general public. And so when we say practicing human-centered AI design, we mean, as people, as product creators, service creators, how can we make sure that we are making decisions about our product and service so that our users feel in control of the technology and not the other way around? Because that's a large risk that we want to make sure that we're especially mindful of when it comes to this technology.
Are you tired of building data solutions that don't get used, or they're undervalued by your customers, whether it's internal customers or maybe you have a software product and the customers aren't seeing the value of the data that you're presenting? If so, I'm really happy to announce that I'm going to be running a new seminar called Designing Human-Centered Data Science Solutions. It's an online seminar and seats are limited. We're going to try to keep it small. And this 4-week seminar is going to help you learn how to work on the human aspects of making your solutions really easy to use and making the value of them really obvious. As many of you probably know, you can get all the data and technical pieces right, but if your intended customer doesn't understand what it's for and how to take that data and make a decision, then it doesn't really matter what kind of plumbing and data pipelines you created in your warehouse and all the infrastructure that you might have stood up. It doesn't matter if that last mile isn't really solid. So I want to get your customers from saying, so what, and what do I do with this data, and kind of get them to a place where they look at your work as being really indispensable and they really understand the value of what it is that you're able to do with your technical skill set. Whether you're an analytics translator, a data scientist, an advanced analytics practitioner, or perhaps you have a team of people who perhaps need some help with these non-technical skills, I hope you'll check out the seminar, and you can go to designingforanalytics.com/seminar to learn about the dates and the pricing and all that good stuff. So hope to see you there. It's funny you brought up kind of the hype. So this really ties into something nice. So I'm getting ready to run my first training seminar in January called Designing Human-Centered Data Science Solutions. And so as part of my own research and dogfooding this, I'm talking to people that come from the data science and analytics background to get feedback. And so I love that you talked about kind of the jargony sound of like human-centered AI. And so here's some feedback from Mike. And I don't know if he's listening to this show, but Brian, regarding the title of your page, I don't like the title of the seminar. Human-centered isn't a benefit to me. It sounds like I'm going to get a sermon on some design religion. Now, I see it's part of your core brand, but that doesn't make it meaningful to me, your audience, I presume. I thought that was really interesting. And apparently there's still some buzz there. Like, how would you respond to someone like Mike if you heard that?
Quite honestly, I love that Mike said that. I really appreciate when people are just straight up candid.
Oh, he gave me the best feedback ever.
Yeah,
like,
great.
It was a wonderful email. I loved it. Like, please, like, dump it.
Yeah, keep it coming. Like, keep it coming. I think my Twitter, my email, whatever. Like, feel free to reach out to me too. I want to hear all the honest shit. I mean it.
Right.
Yes. Absolutely. And so when I'm talking about the People Plus AI guidebook or even the practice of human-centered AI design, how the framing and even the vocabulary that I use varies whether I'm talking to a UX product manager audience, or if it's or the audience skews more engineer, more machine learning engineer, or data science, right? And so I'll be honest that when I'm talking to UX and PM folks, I'd say human-centered AI, because they're already bought into the human-centered design process. I mean, that's like an actual thing that you could Google and like learn, probably, deep dive into, right? But when it comes to data scientists and machine learning engineers, I'll be honest, I get a lot of skepticism around like some of the more fuzzy qualitative design thinking processes where they're not quite sure, like, okay, so what does this actually get us? Like, what's this, what does this drive at, right? Or is it just kind of empty ideation? And so when I'm talking about the People Plus AI guidebook and human-centered AI, I'll actually refer to it as, essentially what it is like it's a resource for helping you. It's a resource of best practices for AI product decisions, right? Because regardless of what role you play, if you are incorporating machine learning in some meaningful way into an end customer experience, there's going to be decisions you need to make around, say, like, how do you onboard your user? How do you onboard your customer to using this machine learning powered agent, for instance? Or how do you help set their expectations so they're not disappointed if if the agent or the system doesn't respond with the kind of output that they're looking for? How do you ensure that they don't overtrust your machine learning system or the agent? That they know when to override it with their own intelligence, right? I mean, there's so many, like, at the end of it, if you're using machine learning to help solve some business goal for you, chances are those business goals are going to be connected to some customers or to some users. And so how your users or your customers interface with whatever machine learning solution you have is a huge consideration that goes beyond, like, that's the harder, I guess, less squishy, kind of like people interest sounding side of human-centered AI.
Right.
It's like really human-centered. On one hand, you can call it human-centered AI, but the same face of it is essentially, how do you make decisions that set up your service for success?
Mm-hmm. And again, for our audience here, when she talks about customers, I think we sometimes have to change, that language can be solution instead of product if we're talking internal. And the customer here may be your internal business sponsor. So this is, if you're working in a bank and, like you're doing like we're trying to predict, give a loan, don't give a loan, using machine learning, and you're providing decision support here. These are the types of checks that the design process can put on measuring whether or not the machine learning outcomes are actually helping the loan officer make a loan approval decision or not. I think you can start to hear from the way you explained it how this ties in. This is very customer focused in the sense of customer being this internal employee who's going to use this. It doesn't really matter. The point is they're human. Even bankers are humans. So even the bank employees, count as a customer. And if they choose to ignore the solution because it's either maybe it's not transparent enough in how it works, or it's too prescriptive, whatever it may be, that would be your measurement or your check. And that's both a qualitative and quantitative check, right? You can probably somehow measure whether or not the recommendation is accepted or not accepted. But there's also the qualitative part where you get that kind of verbal feedback, or you do some kind of usability testing, and you kind of get those reactions to this, loan officer who's supposed to be using this tool and why they may be ignoring it, or what makes them not trust it, and this kind of thing. So that's really the benefit. And then ultimately, if you have that business responsibility, right, then that's where butts are on the line, right? Because if you spent, $25 million 6 months building some giant, thing that's supposed to help you predict, give a loan, don't give a loan, and the loan officers are still using their old recipe to do everything because maybe they got burned or they saw some really suspicious, recommendation that they didn't trust, and they kind of just put it aside as this thing isn't ready yet. That's where you have to decide, well, was it worth $25 million? And someone eventually is going to ask a question like, what did we get for this $25 million that we spent? why are people not using this? Like, we're not seeing an income change. We're not seeing loan approval rates going up, or, whatever that metric is that we want to measure against. So I think it's important to remember that, customer here can mean internal business sponsor as well for the non-tech folks out there.
Yes. And I think that's I'm really glad that you drove that point home, because when I mentioned up front that a lot of my work is helping teams outside of Google overcome challenges in working with machine learning, right? Or like in designing with machine learning. And the
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of folks, maybe less so for your users who already have like a deep data science background, but for a lot of the teams that I work with, they're still, they're keenly interested in what this quote unquote, this new world of machine learning entails, but they're just trying to wrap their mind around that vocabulary even, right? And like what are the capabilities and
Mm-hmm.
strengths of machine learning, for instance? And so there's a lot of teams, a lot of folks are still evolving their own mental model around what machine learning is and what it's good for. But closely and in relation, this is something that I feel like people don't talk as much about, maybe because it's less sexy to talk about than machine learning, is that there are oftentimes a lot of organizational or political or like cultural uncertainties or confusion around even integrating machine learning, so to speak, right? So, like kind of to your point, like, for this $25 million investment, like, what am I going to get from it? Or, how does this improve, from the baseline? Or, if I'm working in an organization that may be more risk averse, how, what, why would I take a bet on machine learning? Or, like the solution itself is never it's never gonna stand alone in a silo, right? But like your tellers are gonna interact with it, like your bank customers are gonna interact with it. You have bank managers who are gonna have some kind of have some kind of touch point with it. There are a lot of other people involved in this system around whatever machine learning solution it is that you happen to implement. And so we need to have an understanding of what their concerns and their challenges are before we ever start working on the solution to begin with, because then otherwise it just falls flat on its face.
Yeah, yeah. One thing we even said other people. One thing I liked in the guidebook was, there was even talk about designing the rater experience. So if you're labeling data,
Mm,
you're when
mhm,
we talk about human centered, right? Where you might even be talking, ethically about the people who aren't even in the room. So
mhm,
this is partly where designers can help you think about what's not really obviously present there, because we're always thinking about that experience piece, right? And also, but also, how does this going to create business value? And sometimes those things are at odds with each other, but that's, to me, part of that's the difference between the good and the great designer, right? Is that ability to kind of merge the business objectives with ethically sound and user facing and user centered principles. It's both of those, and it's partly why I don't like UX as much, because I feel like UX is always talking about one half. In a commercial setting, at least, you're talking about one half of the story, and there's really two pieces that need to come together in order for most of these solutions to be viable.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're getting close to our time here. I wanted to go one nerdier level down on something here, just for some of our more technical audience that might be listening here. But I was curious after I read the guidebook, and is there like a different approach or considerations that need to be given when you pair up, human centered design and machine learning based on the type of technical model that's being used? So it's a decision
Mm,
tree, or it's a random forest, or whatever that model is that needs to be used. I'm guessing there's times where that model, there's a strong preference to use a model for a technical reason, or it's almost like you pretty much know you're going to need to use that. Does it change what activities the design group will go through in order to get that right, or are they pretty independent?
ooh, so for that, okay, I will be honest and tell you upfront right now that I could not tell you the nitty-gritty differences like, between, like, say, a random forest algorithm and, a convolutional neural network or whatever else, right? In terms of, like, the kinds of models, I could not I wouldn't be able to speak to the technical details under the hood of it, but what I can, and I say this, it's something that I'm continuing to try to learn, because the more I understand, the easier it will be for me to work with my own machine learning engineers, right? But for folks at large who are utilizing the People Plus AI guidebook, or who are thinking about the end user facing considerations of machine learning, if you're not the one who's directly working on like collecting and cleaning the data, for instance, or if you're not the one who's directly working on the model itself, you still have you still are empowered to make sure that you are making decisions, product decisions, business decisions, that are still in the best interest of your end users. And so I'd say for folks like myself who come from more of a user experience or a product background, it's helpful for us to understand the nitty-gritty of models, but it's not necessary, because what we have the most stake in is to make sure that we understand how utilizing machine learning impacts the end user experience. And that's something that stands independent of the actual model itself.
Yeah. And so my question wasn't so much the difference between the models, but whether or not the design activities we do change because of a technical model choice. So a neural network versus a random forest, does that, it's neural network, and for some reason we know it's going to have to use this technology. So therefore we're going to do 3 times more of sugar and 2 parts less flour in our design recipe that we go through because of that technology choice. That was more the question.
No,
Sorry.
I understand now. Not in my experience, no.
That's all right. No, I was just curious. Cool. This is I mean, you've dumped a ton of great stuff on our listeners here. It's been really fun to talk about this. So I'm curious, do you have any again, thinking about kind of, our audience, data science leaders and analytics leaders that may be coming at this from that, technical math stats perspective, any final takeaways that you would give to them about either putting this into play or getting past the feeling that sounds like it takes a lot of time and it's going to slow stuff down? I can almost guarantee there's probably people thinking about that. Sounds really nice. Who has time for that? How would you send them away from this episode?
Yeah. Well, I'd say you can either save time now, or you can either save time at the upfront, or you can potentially lose time on coming out the other end, right? What if you spend all that time investing in machine learning and you find out actually, it's not the output that it's generating isn't useful for our users, or they don't trust it, or they have other qualms and considerations over the fact that machine learning is even at play at all. I mean, that would be a real pity to find that out at the end of 9 months and all this time, all this funding as well that you invested in the effort, right? Versus validating very early on, having the confidence that you are on the right path to solving the right problem.
Sure. I would 100% second that. I think you just built your technical debt up. You have a team now that spent, however many months building the wrong stuff that nobody wants to use. Your trust, the perception of the quality of your work and the value that you're providing is hopefully absent, and maybe in some places no one's even paying attention because there's a lot of money being thrown at this space and not a lot of accountability, it seems, a lot of the time. But it's so much more fun to work on stuff that people want to use, at least as a maker. And I tend to think of data scientists as problem solvers and makers. So they're in the family of designers, and it doesn't really matter whether we call them designers or not, because it's really about the activities and behaviors that we go through. And I don't know, there's even just a fun and job satisfaction level thing too, where you start small, you try to make small improvements and monitor them over time. And it just, to me, it builds up so much more rapport with the teams. And it's just it's a longer term, instead of thinking about each project level, right? It's about a team that's starting to being looked at as strategic,
Yeah.
Cool. Where can people find out more? I know we said the pair.withgoogle.com has the guidebook on it, and I'll put that in the notes. If someone wanted to just kind of follow your ramblings, do you ramble on the Twitters or the LinkedIns, or where are you?
Yes. So you can find me on Twitter. My handle is at DQPDANG. And Brian, I can also make sure I send that to you.
Yes.
And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out and send me a message. I don't check LinkedIn as often as I should, But my inbox is open as well on Twitter, so feel free to reach out anytime with feedback, questions, concerns, honest, candid feedback. Mike, if you're listening out there, I'm game for all of it because the People Plus AI guidebook it's a starting point. It's a living document. When it comes to
Yep.
software applications of machine learning, it's a relatively nascent space, and we have a lot to learn from in terms of designing for it, right? And so the People Plus AI guidebook is a starting point, and we want to understand what works, what doesn't, what's missing, so that we can continue to build the set of best practices around AI product decisions together.
Great. I love it. And thanks for putting this out and sharing all this good stuff with us. This has been a great episode.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Yeah, cheers.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.